You know, I feel like I was brainwashed because they totally pandered to my entrepreneurial mindset because that was my minor in college. So it was like, hey, if you work hard, you'll be able to own your own office one day and be an entrepreneur. And I was like, heck yeah, sign me up. So like, that's what drew me into the company, but it was all a facade. Like, if you're an owner of an office, you're like a franchisee. You don't actually own anything. The parent company owns you. The real face began to appear when I realized that my boss, Penny, was living in a hotel. And then she ended up moving in with Janet because I guess she couldn't afford the hotel room anymore. But my question is, if your position is so successful and you're an owner, why are you not able to afford your own place? And there was a lot of my coworkers that all lived together too. It was so weird. Okay, let's get into the pay. Like I said before, the hours were 8 to 6 roughly, but they were really 7:30 a.m. to 6:30 if we're being honest. So I was working 10 to 12 hours a day, and sometimes on Saturdays. There was a base pay of $250, I'm pretty sure. But that's if you didn't make any sales. So if you made more sales than the base pay, like let's say you made $500 in sales, you would get the $500. You wouldn't get the $500 plus the $250 base pay. It was like one or the other. I forget what it's called, but it was one of those. The only way you would make more than the base pay is if you hit 15 sales a week, which is 3 sales a day. But also, before anyone tries to say,
oh, you were a contractor.
I was not a contractor. The tax forms that I signed were for an employee. I was not a contracted employee, because if I was a contract employee, there's no way in hell I would have signed those papers. And it was so frustrating when I would try to tell my boss this at the end, and she was like, you're a contracted employee. Actually, let's say you worked 45 to 50 hours a week, so that's 8 to 10 hours a day plus Saturday. That's a whopping $5 an hour if you didn't make any sales. And there was a lot of weeks like that where I would work every single day for 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours, and I wouldn't make any sales. Or I'd make 2 and then I would make 1, or maybe I'd make 3. It was never enough for 15. Let's get into the meat of the video, which is the New York trip.
Get in with you though.
It's a video! There was a New York City sales gala for all of the offices to come together and congratulate each other about how great they are and how much money they made. Penny would select 2 people from the office, one who's the master of the sales and one that's an up-and-comer. Janet was the master of sales and I was the up-and-comer. Let's be honest, I did not make enough sales. She frequently proclaimed that this trip would be all-inclusive and expenses paid, and it was a great honor if you were chosen to go to the gala. It was such a big deal. That all-inclusive, all expenses paid was a lie straight out of the pit of hell. Prior to the trip, this will come up later, I promise, I lost my debit card. Janet had an extra card and an account that I could use, so I took money from my account, put it in her account, and used her debit card. I didn't have my card in time before the trip. Penny booked me and Janet's flight. We were on separate flights, by the way. One stop, both ways. Her flight got to NYC at 2 p.m. I think. My flight, I wasn't so lucky. I was scheduled to get there at 11 p.m. by myself with no transportation in a new city I'd never been to. What could go wrong? I was flying American Airlines, so I bet you can guess where this is going. My flight was delayed. I got there, New York City, brand new city I've never been to, by the way, at midnight on a Friday, I think. So I call a cab, paid for it myself, by the way. So I'm in Queens. I get the cab. I wanted to take me to a subway station that will take me to Manhattan because that's where we were staying. I take the cab to the subway station. I get to the subway station, get on the train. Everything's fine and dandy, but the train stops because of construction. So they're like, get out. So I freak out, honestly. I call Janet and she's with Mary, who works for the NYC office. So she was a native. So she's like,
get on this and then get on that and then get. I'm like, I don't know what you're saying.
So Janet comes back on and she's like, you just gonna get an Uber. Another Uber, by the way. And the closest Uber is in Manhattan. And I'm in Queens. It's gonna take him like 15 minutes, but he's going the opposite direction because I can see him on the thing. And I was like, this isn't working. So I duck into this freaking deli. The workers give me the dirtiest look because I didn't buy anything and they hated me. And I was a tourist. It was very obvious. I was in a dress and I had a suitcase. Like, I was a walking Target, let's be honest. As I was trying to organize transportation, this random guy walks up to the glass door and is like, looking at me. And I'm like, this is the end. Father's Day me. I give up on Uber. I run outside, hail a cab that was like driving by. I get on it, tell them where I want to go. By the time I get to the Sheraton Hotel in Times Square, I had spent at least $50 on transportation, 2 taxis, and 1 Metro pass. And by this point, it's like 1 a.m. I get to the hotel room and Janet's like,
Oh, we're staying with 3 other people in our room.
huh? There was 2 queen-size beds, 5 people, 1 person slept on the floor, and this was a guy, by the way, which I feel like shouldn't be allowed because it's like, whatever, I'm not gonna get into that. We go sightsee, we're gonna go to this party that like the office was having, whatever. Janet was a flirt, she attracted all these weird guys. It was a whole thing, honestly. So the next day was the gala, and it was
Whack.
it was just a bunch of salespeople congratulating themselves on how much money they made. I'm sitting over here with $10 in my bank account, but I didn't know I had only $10 in my bank account. The next day we leave, which is Sunday. Janet blacked out, so Penny ordered her an Uber so she could get to the airport because her flight was at like 6 a.m. So she had to get there by like 4-ish. My flight was in the late afternoon, so I go to Eisenberg Sandwich Shop and I'm like, I'm gonna eat a sandwich. So I'm sitting there, order a sandwich, and I text Janet and I'm like, hey, how much money is in your account? And she's like, $11. Like, what? Because when I put money in my account, I didn't think I'd spend more than $150 the whole trip. But I did, because I spent so much money on freaking Ubers. It was
Whack.
so at this point the panic set in because I couldn't transfer money from my account to her account because I didn't have my card, and I didn't even think of Venmo because I didn't really use it then. Call my boss and I'm like, hey, can you order me an Uber so I can go to the airport and go home, please? She's like,
Oh, I left my bank card at the bar. You can't.
so I end up overdrafting her account so I can get to the freaking airport on a business trip. This was a business trip. So I get on my flight. Of course, it's delayed like by hours because there was weather. So I finally get to, let's say it was Missouri. I can't remember where it was. And I get there at 9:15. Guess what time my flight left? 9 p.m. It left without me and like 4 other people. So I go to an airline worker and I'm like,
Hey, can I get a hotel room, or do y'all have like a lounge I can sleep in?
and she's like, no.
And she's like, how old are you?
I'm like, how does that matter? I'm stuck in this rando city. Get me a freaking hotel room. Anyway, she's like, no. So I call Penny and I'm like,
I need a hotel room. This is some BS.
and she's like,
I'll call you back.
I can't do her accent. I'm sorry. And then I call my dad. He doesn't answer because he was like flying at the time, I think. And then I call my sister and I'm like crying and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck here. This is the worst day ever. And then the airline worker comes up and she's like, I got you a room. And I'm like, heck yes, thank you. So I take the thing to the hotel and then I get to go to my room, but I have to put a credit card on the room in case there's damages. But remember, guys, I don't have my card. I have Janet's card. I almost said her actual name. So I'm like calling Janet. I'm like, pick up the damn phone. And she sends her ID and I end up getting in the room. And then I leave the next morning. And this is a Monday, a work day. And I'm like, I'm not going to work today. Taking a day off because of my terrible last few days. I'm not going to work. And so I tell Janet that and she's like,
Actually, you have to work because you didn't work Friday or Saturday.
the reason I didn't work Friday and Saturday was because I was chosen to go to this business trip. What do you mean? So I succumb, go to the field, make 0 sales. So the final straw that made me quit was the fact that we switched to door-to-door sales. Street sales and door-to-door sales are very different because one you have to do in like a minute or 2, and the other one you can take like 20 minutes, you know? You can take your time. So it's a completely different sales tactic, and we didn't know what we were doing because our boss gave us no instruction. They sent us like, you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here. And then like, we're like, how about we all go to the same place? So if we need help, we're like nearby. So everyone was like, yeah, let's do that. It was like a team decision. So we were like,
Screw you, Penny.
so she finds out and she's like,
Whose retarded idea was that?
I was like, no. I was shook. I told Janet, I'm like, I'm done. She's like, why don't you just go home? And I don't think she realized that when I say I'm done, I'm done. So I call Penny and I'm like,
Hey, I quit.
she's like,
Okay.
that's literally all she said. Someone I worked for months was like, okay. Anyway, Janet quit shortly after I did. So that was my sales cult experience. I hope you enjoyed that show of an experience that I just retold. I will link different resources in the description below. There's a documentary that I think is really good, and there's the website that kind of tells you about MLMs and like how they're basically the same company masquerading as different companies. Okay, so make sure you like the video if you liked it and subscribe for a new video tomorrow. We'll see you guys then. Bye.